It was a beautiful morning. The sun was just coming up. There was a light breeze coming from the water. Many of the soldiers were trying to soak up every minute of this deployment. Many of them recognized that they hit the jackpot when they got stationed here. And on this particular morning, some of them were coming off of their night shift. Some of them were just getting up and getting ready for church. Some of them, or most of them, were still asleep. Some of those still sleeping were trying to sleep off their drunken stupor from the night before. But none of them, not one of them, understood or recognized that in a few hours their world would be turned upside down, that many of them would be killed, that nearly an entire fleet of battleships would be destroyed. September 6, 1941, journalist Clark Beach wrote this in a publication. He said, "A Japanese attack on Hawaii is regarded as the most unlikely thing in the world. With one chance in a million of being successful, besides having more powerful defense than any other post under the American flag, it, meaning Pearl Harbor, is protected by distance." And yet most of you remember seeing a picture like this, either in a history book or watching the History Channel. You remember that almost 3 months to the day after this journalist wrote those words, that there's a 1 in a million chance that Pearl Harbor would be hit, that nearly 3 months to the day, that 1 in a million chance took place and Pearl Harbor was attacked. Now, many of you remember that picture, that visual from maybe a history book or History Channel, but this next one you don't recall from history. Most of you actually remember sitting on your couch and watching this take place live, in person, in real time. September 11th, 2011, you remember the Twin Towers being attacked. But I want you to see this next picture, and I want you to embed that in your mind for a moment, those two towers towering up over the skyline of New York, and I want you to see that in your mind, that for decades, that scene, those two towers standing up over the skyline, they meant something. They symbolized the power and the wealth and the stability of our country. Those two towers standing up over the skyline of New York seemed to scream to the rest of the world, "Look at America, we're one of the greatest nations." And yet those two towers would come down in 102 minutes. Let me back up even further in history. Let me go back to the early 1900s, and many of you will remember this from your history books as well. You see this picture of this ship, and you probably remember that's the Titanic. And it was kind of the Tower of Babel, if you know the Tower of Babel story. It was kind of the Tower of Babel of the early 20th century, because they were saying this ship is the ingenuity of modern man. It was one of the biggest ships ever made, and it was unsinkable, they said. And yet in 2 hours and 40 minutes, it would disappear under the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, and to this day it sits on the bottom. I want you to back up in your mind with me now just to your childhood. And I want you to remember when you were sleeping in your room or almost asleep in your room and you hear a noise or something in the closet, or your imagination begins to paint this vivid picture of this monster under your bed. And what did you do? Remember what you did? You took the sheets and you slowly pulled them up over your head. That was your security blanket. That's what was going to give you safety, as if a jagged tooth monster with claws, was going to crawl out from under the bed and stand over you, and saliva dripping down and going, "Wah!" And then suddenly see the sheet and go, "Oh man, they got the sheet again. I can't get them." It didn't make any sense, but we did it. See, the truth is we all had security blankets when we were children, right? Every one of us, if you talk to your parents or your grandparents or your aunts and uncles, they'll all tell you about something, maybe a blanket, maybe a stuffed animal, but something you had, a sheet that you would pull up over your head. And we all grew out of that. Or did we? See, I actually think that we just created different security blankets as adults. Maybe it was a fleet of battleships. Maybe it was two towers that symbolize power and strength and stability. Maybe it was a ship that's unsinkable. But what has happened to us over and over and over again throughout human history and throughout your life and my life is those security blankets continued to crumble. Like the towers, like the battleships being sunk, like the Titanic. But it begs the question then, so what do we hang on to for security, for safety, for stability? Because the reason that you and I are still scrambling to find something from the time we gave up that security blanket when we were children, the reason we're still trying to find something is because we as humans, we need something. We need something that can be our stability in this world that is constantly changing. So what do we hold on to? Well, in Psalms chapter 61, David writes about this security, this safety, this stability. And so if you have your Bibles, open up there. If you have a hard copy like I'm holding in my hand, open it right to the middle. You'll probably fit Psalms. Find Psalm 61. If you have a smart device and a Bible app, scroll down till you get to Psalm 61. You're going to want to see this. It's a great psalm. David wrote this 3,000 years ago. God, help us get this. God, I pray that your Spirit would move in our hearts and minds to get this. Oh, we need this. Because there's not one of us, there's not a single one of us that don't every day scramble to hold on to some kind of stability in this ever-changing world. Oh, we need to get this. So Psalm 61 is written by David. Most scholars actually believe that it was written at a very desperate time in his life, and most believe that it was actually when he was running for his life from Absalom. So if you know anything about David's life, David, when he was announced that he would be the future king, he ends up spending about a decade running for his life from King Saul. About 10 years, hiding in caves, and he wrote a lot of psalms in here, desperate psalms in here about those times. But most scholars believe that this particular one, Psalm 61, was written when David was running from not Saul, but years later he's become king. Now his own son rises up against him. His own son is trying to kill him. And so David is running for his life once again. But you can imagine the desperation, the disappointment, the betrayal, the grief that he is wrestling with. Because this isn't just anyone trying to kill him, it's his flesh and blood, his son. And so we pick it up, Isaiah 61, or Psalms chapter 61, verse 1. David starts off this psalm by saying, "Hear my cry, O God, listen to my prayer." Now you have to put an exclamation point after that, and you can't read it quite like I did, because that's how we usually read things in church. This happened 3,000 years ago, and so we think that David's sitting in some cave, and he's got everything together, and he's writing this out on some parchment or scroll, and he's saying, "Hear my cry, O God, listen to my prayer." No. Imagine him. "Hear my cry. God, listen to my prayer." And by the way, God loves those kind of prayers. You see, God doesn't want these spiritual sounding, well-organized prayers where we go back and speak in some kind of old English, "Oh, thou art God." No, he wants the transparency. He wants to hear from our hearts. See, I remember a Father's Day years ago when my children were still young. There was a bunch of us together. We were out in this backyard, this big backyard, and there was a bunch of kids playing, and suddenly I hear this scream, like this blood-curdling scream. You as parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, you know what I'm talking about. We're not talking about a kid just crying. We're talking about something where every adult stood up and they're going, "What is going on?" And I look up and I see our middle child, our son, he was maybe 6 at the time, and he's running toward me, and there's blood just everywhere. There's blood just coming out of his mouth. And he's holding something in his hand. It's this long white thing, and I don't understand what that could be. And then he gets up to me, and I realize it's his tooth with the root, like the whole thing. So he was chasing someone. He fell down. His tooth caught someone's shirt and just ripped the whole thing out. Now, my son was not running across the yard going, Father, I'm in pain." No, he's screaming. He's like, Dad! That's what David's doing. He's desperate. And oh, God loves those kind of prayers. So read verse 1 again. Hear my cry, oh God, listen to my prayer. Here's what David is doing. I could translate that and say, here's what he's saying. Dad, do you hear me? Look at verse 2. From the ends of the earth I call to you. You get the ends of the earth isn't just physical. Sometimes the ends of the earth for you and me, you get it, that sometimes the ends of the earth is emotional. Sometimes the ends of the earth is spiritual. Sometimes when you're crying out to God, you feel like you're so far away. You haven't heard from him for days and weeks and months, and he seems to be silent. And so when David writes from the ends of the earth, this isn't just a physical distance. You know what he's talking about. Emotional, spiritual. You feel this distance. You feel like you're hanging on by a thread. He goes on, look at this. From the ends of the earth I call to you. I call as my heart grows faint. He's exhausted, he's tired, he's wore out. He's at the end of himself. And then look at how he finishes this verse. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. What does he mean by that? He's desperate. Dad, help me. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. And I think most of us get it, that he's talking about stability, safety, security. But look at the next verse, because he actually explains a little bit what he means by when he says, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Look at verse 3. He says, for or because you have, pause there for just a moment, okay? Notice what just happened. He just changed tenses. Every English teacher just sat up on their couch right now and you got really excited. You're snapping at your kid. Johnny, listen to the pastor. Listen to the pastor, he's talking. Because this is English class right here. Listen. Here's what he did. He just changed tenses, and that's so important for us to get. In the first two verses, listen, he's saying present tense. Hear my cry. Listen to my prayer. I call to you. I call as my heart grows faint. Lead me to the rock. That's all present tense. And why is he saying, lead me to the rock that is higher than I? Because, verse 3, you have past tense. Don't miss that. Lead me to stability. Lead me to security. Lead me to safety. Why? Because I remember. I remember what you did for my ancestors. I remember what you've done in my life. Keep reading. Look what he says. Verse 3. For you have been my refuge. Circle these two words. Highlight these two words. You have been a strong tower against the foe. What's interesting is that a few decades later, David's son Solomon in the book of Proverbs is going to write almost the same exact words. And so I almost picture a couple of decades later when Solomon is sitting down, he's got his parchment, his scrolls opened up, and he's writing all of these really cool proverbs. And he pauses at one point, he remembers the wisdom that his dad, David, spoke into his life. He remembers maybe even a song. Maybe these words were put to a song. And so he has that song going through his head. And so in Proverbs chapter 18:10, he writes almost these same exact words. He says this, the name of the Lord is look at those two words, strong tower. The righteous run into it. Just like his father David decades before, he's saying, God is a strong tower, but he adds something that David didn't. He said, the name of the Lord is a strong tower. If you were here last fall, you may remember me describing the Hebrew word. This was written in Hebrew 3,000 years ago. The Hebrew word for name is Shem. And that's important for us because the Hebrew language is an interesting language. There weren't a lot of words in that language. So every word had to have layered meanings or deeper meanings or multiple meanings. So when we in our English language hear the word name, it simply means title. What is your name? My name is Patrick McCalla. My title is Patrick McCalla. But in Hebrew, name, Shem, it actually means their reputation, their authority, their character. So when Solomon takes what he remembers his father David talking about, this strong tower that God is, he adds something. He says, the Shem, the name, the reputation, the identity, the character of my God is a strong tower. And see, that's important because Solomon recognized that the stability, the security blanket that humanity is longing for is found in one place. Not just the title of God, not like there's something mysterious and powerful about the word Yahweh, but in the Shem, the name, the identity, the authority, the reputation. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. Jump back to Psalm 61, verse 3. And look again what David writes. He's out there in the wilderness somewhere running for his life. He's in desperation. He starts this psalm off saying, Dad, help me, like my son running across the yard. And then you get to verse 3 and he says, because you have been my refuge. There's those words again, right? A strong, you circled those, you highlighted those, a strong tower against the foe. Remember, this was written 3,000 years ago. So when they're writing this, or the people are reading this later, they immediately have a picture that we miss a little bit because modern warfare is much different than it was back then. See, we don't drive up to Phoenix anymore and have gates and walls and towers guarding our city. You don't go to Los Angeles and have gates and walls and towers guarding the city, or New York City, or anywhere. You don't do that anymore. Modern warfare has changed. But back then, a city, the security, the safety, the stability of the city was found in the walls, in the gates, in the towers. So they would all get a mental image. They would all know that if you lived outside of Jerusalem 3,000 years ago and you heard about an invading army coming, you would gather all your essentials, you would run inside the gates, they would shut the gates of the city, and now you were safe because of the walls, the gates, and the towers. But there's something even, this is so good. There's something even better here. This is so good. You got to get this. That when he's saying, both David and Solomon, when they're saying you are a strong tower, it's another thing that we miss in our translation into English. They're literally saying, a better literal translation, but it would make sense to you and I today, is that he is a high tower. You see, what they're saying is that we run to God because he is a high tower. He's higher than all of our circumstances. He's higher than all of our troubles. He's higher than all the instabilities in our world. See, there's two things that apply to you and I when we think of God being our high tower, our strong tower, our high tower, is one, it changes your perspective. I talked about this last week. Go back and listen to that message. That this changes the way we see things when we get up high, right? You're down here and you're in the grass, you're in the weeds, and you don't really see. You get up high and all of a sudden it changes the perspective. That's what happens when we run to God, our high tower. But he also, and this is where I think the symbolism was really connected to David and Solomon, when they're saying, I'm running to the strong tower, this high tower, because I need to be above my anxiety. I need to be above my panic attacks. I need to be above my fears. I need to be above my failures. I need to be above my divorce. I need to be above COVID. I need to be above cancer. I need to be above, you list it. And they're saying that's where you can run. This strong tower, this high tower. Fast forward about 1,000 years from David and Solomon. Jesus is sitting in the upper room with his disciples. It's the last night of his life. He spent 3 or 4 years announcing himself as the Messiah, traveling with his disciples, doing miracles. And on this night, he's having the last discourse, the last dinner that he's going to have with them. They're celebrating the Passover. But he starts this long conversation with them. It's John 14, 15, and 16, 3 chapters. And he starts to explain to them that he's going to die. And the disciples don't get it. They had a different view of what the Messiah was going to do. But Jesus is talking about dying. But look what he says, John chapter 14, in verse 27. Jesus said, okay, guys, I'm going to die, but I'm leaving you with a gift. Peace of mind and heart. And the peace I give is a gift the world cannot give. So don't be troubled or afraid. He's saying, guys, I'm going to die, but I'm going to give you a gift. And I'm going to give you a gift the world can't give. I'm going to give you peace. And I'm going to give you a peace that the world cannot provide for you. He talks, read it, 14, 15, 16. He talks a bunch more, but then he circles back around near the end of his conversation. Flip a few pages in your Bible, John chapter 16, verse 33. Jesus is still having the same conversation. He circles back around to this idea of peace. In verse 33, John 16, he says, I have told you all of this so that you may have peace. Underline these next two words, in me. Why would Jesus say, in me? I'm telling you all of this so that you can have peace in me. Because his Jesus' great granddaddies, Solomon and David, wrote about this high tower, this stability, this security, this peace 1,000 years before. And they wrote and they said, there's only one place where you can truly find stability and peace in this ever-changing world, and that is in God. And so Jesus said, I'm going to give you peace that the world can't give, and that peace is found in me. But this is what I love. I would have loved to be in these places, these situations with Jesus, and just looked at the facial expressions of those that heard Jesus teach. Because look at what he does next. Keep reading, John 16, verse 33. I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows. But take heart because I have overcome the world. Wait, what? I mean, make up your mind, Jesus. Are you going to give us peace or sorrows and troubles? You can't have both. Make up your mind. You just got done saying you're going to give us a peace that the world cannot offer you, and then you turn around and say, I'm going to give you this peace that's found in me. Oh, and by the way, you're going to have troubles and sorrows in this world. Well, then what about the peace you just talked about? See, the reason it doesn't really make sense to you and I is because of the way you and I define peace. Most of the time, we define peace by the absence of something. When we say our country is at peace, it means there's an absence of war. If I were to tell you that my wife and I are at peace, it means that we have an absence of fighting or turmoil in our home. And so the way that you and I often, or the way the world often defines peace, is it's the absence of something. But Jesus is saying, I'm going to give you a peace that's not the absence of those things. I'm going to give you a peace in the midst of those things. See, this is how I would define peace. This is the definition that I like of peace. And I would encourage you, this is what I do with this. I'm actually going to type this out, so maybe you want to take your phone out right now. I'm going to type this next phrase I'm going to give you. I'm going to type this out on my phone, and I'm going to tell my phone to send it to me as a reminder every morning for the next 7 days at 7 a.m. I don't know what time you'll do it. But every morning I want to read this phrase as a reminder of this peace that Jesus offers that the world cannot offer. See, peace is to be more God-conscious than circumstance-conscious. Peace is to be more God-conscious than circumstance-conscious. Peace is to be more God-conscious than circumstance-conscious. We run into that high tower God, the Shem, the name, the reputation, the authority of God, and even though our circumstances around us do not change, we've changed our perspective, we've changed our focus, and now it's not so much focusing on those, but the strength and the power and the might of this high tower that we're in. See, the truth is that as human beings, we never really let go of our security blankets. They just change. And so we build ships and we say they're unsinkable, and we build massive towers and those are supposed to symbolize wealth and power and strength, and yet in 102 minutes they come down. We have one of the greatest naval fleets in the history of this world, and in a matter of 2 hours, most of it is destroyed. We have our health, and then we go to the doctor and find out we no longer have our health. You have a marriage and you put your security in your spouse, but one day they come home and they say, I don't love you anymore. And the fact is, we live in a world that is constantly changing, which is why 3,000 years ago, David and Solomon both said, there's one security blanket we need to hang on to. It's the high tower, the strong tower, the Shem, the reputation and authority of God. You're going to see a picture on the screen, and it's a lighthouse with this massive wave crashing around it. And I want you just to focus on that picture for a moment. I want you to see that wave, and I want that wave to represent, look at that wave, look at it. I want that wave to represent whatever it is in your life. I don't know you, but I know you have circumstances in your life. I have circumstances in my life. These volatile situations. And so maybe for some of you, that wave is your anxiety and panic attacks. Maybe for some of you, that wave represents your failures that you keep being reminded of. Maybe that wave represents for some of you the cancer that you're battling or the COVID that you're battling. Maybe for some of you, that wave represents the rioting and the injustices that we see and racism that we see in our world. Maybe for some of you, that wave represents, you fill in the blank. And as you look at that picture with that massive wave, if you were standing there, where is the only safe place for you to be? Where is the only safe place for you to be? If you're anywhere out there, you're done. The only safe place in the midst of that would be to be inside of that lighthouse, that tower. No wonder that 3,000 years ago, David and Solomon wrote. David, in this desperate situation, says, God, I'm going to the one place of safety and security and stability. This tower that is above all of the brokenness and depravity of this world. Peace is to be more God-conscious than circumstance-conscious. God, may we get that. God, I pray that we can understand and grasp the enormity of what David and Solomon wrote all these years ago. The truth that you, Jesus, spoke to your friends, your disciples on that last night. What you're offering us, a peace that no one else can offer. A peace that isn't the absence of troubles. A peace that isn't the absence of all the things that we see in our world, but a peace in the midst of it. And like David, like Solomon, God, I pray that we would be people that would run to your Shem, to your reputation, to your authority, to your name, to your identity as the one King of kings and Lord of lords that can truly provide safety and security. We love you, Jesus. Amen.